From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
I am pleased to turn the stage over to Brendan Kiely.
How you doing? Nice one. I love the calm response. This is good. I am very, very grateful. Thank you for that super kind introduction, and I'm just really grateful to be here at the National Book Festival with all of you, and very excited to share with you. You can probably barely see it out there, but I know there's a camera back there, so I'm just going to mug for the camera, and I'm excited to share with you the last true love story. I've been very fortunate. I worked in a high school in New York City for 10 years, and when I published the Gospel of Winter, that was my final year of teaching, and it was a remarkable experience to be still teaching my classes and speaking to students about my own book. And I love this confluence in the young adult world because I think that young adult readers are avid, passionate readers, and I feel so grateful to be a writer in the community with them. And I think YA readers, as you mentioned, actually span all ages, and so that's very cool. Before I tell you about this book, let me tell you a family story. In September of 2001, actually, a number of folks in my large Irish Catholic family decided that it would be a good idea to try to help my grandfather get back to Ireland, to the village that his whole family is from, and in order for him to see it one last time, because he had Alzheimer's disease, and it was a thing that we wanted to do to try to help him sort of see this important space one last time. It was kind of a romantic idea, and I don't know in hindsight how smart it was. In fact, it was a little dangerous. And lo and behold, so I got lucky. I was one of the family members who was chosen to go with him. And I went with my grandmother and my grandfather and my Uncle Bob, and I met them over there, and we all were touring around looking at the village, and it was pretty remarkable because I have a photo to this day of my grandfather standing on a stone bridge right in Strad Valley, and he's holding a postcard that he had, and that was his only way of remembering where in the village his family was from. Now, the problem, like I said, though, is that it was a little dangerous. He had Alzheimer's, and there were moments where he would really lose touch with what we were doing and where we were, and it was quite frightening. It was frightening for me. I had recently moved to New York. I had recently graduated from college, and to see my grandfather in this state where he was, at one point we were at a hospital because they had records, and he thought he was back in high school. And it was disorienting to be there and see this and to see the pain, that my uncle was experiencing and my grandmother, and mostly for him, because he would go in and out of these moments. And so I also knew I had to do something else about this. I really wanted to try to record his stories and try to get them down so that we had the family recording of these stories. And so at night, after we had ventured to various places, I'd sit down in the hotel room with him, and I'd say, "Grandpa, tell me about life back in Worcester, Massachusetts." We're from Massachusetts. "Tell me about growing up in Worcester." And he'd tell me all these stories that were about, trying to get to school and going through the neighborhood. But his stories would wander, and as often happens, the stories began to meander and go somewhere else. And the anchor, every time when he was coming back and we realized he had gone off, or if he just didn't know where he was anymore, his anchor, the refrain that he would say every single time was, "And this is why I love your grandmother. And this is why I love your grandmother. And this is why I love your grandmother." And so for me, I wanted to write a love story that was an homage to the man who, despite this disease, wanted to make clear in whatever moments of clarity that he hung on to, that the most important thing that he could say was, I love you, and I love you to my grandmother. That matters to me. Love is the foundation, I think, for all three of the books that I have been fortunate enough to publish, and I wanted to honor that spirit in this book. So, what's this book? This book is it does not take place in Ireland. It takes place in the United States. It is about, in brief, Teddy Hendrix, who was a 17-year-old boy, a lonely poet living in Los Angeles, who was basically raised by his grandfather, who is now in an assisted living facility in LA because he has Alzheimer's disease, and it's difficult to take care of him at home. Teddy's been going to visit him and spend time with him, and he says, he's talking to the grandfather, and at the beginning of the book, the grandfather is searching for this photograph of the grandmother, and finally they're able to find it, but he says to Teddy, make me a promise. Please don't let me forget your grandmother. She's deceased. She died years earlier, and the last thing he wants is to experience that pain, the pain of losing the memory of her. So he says, make me a promise. Promise me you won't let me forget her. And it's an impossible promise, but Teddy makes it. And so he's trying to figure out, how am I going to get Grandpa across the country? Because Grandpa is from Ithaca, New York. And how am I going to get him there? Because if I can get him there, if I can get him back to that hillside where he first kissed the woman of his life, the woman who was the love of his life, maybe we can do something to try to hold on to these memories. We can go back to the church where you were married, and maybe that'll conjure up some of the memories. It's a quixotic, romantic hope, but he still wants to do it. The problem is he can't drive. So as he's one night, as he's out on the boardwalk, the Venice Beach boardwalk in LA, and he's listening to the 17-year-old girl that he has a huge crush on, who's this rocker, who's rocking it out on the Venice Beach boardwalk. They slip off and have an adventure in that evening, and Corrina, the rock star, learns that he wants to make this trip, and she wants to get out of LA, to get out to New York City, to jumpstart her music career. And so she says, Teddy, here's the deal. Pack your bags. We're stealing your mother's car, and we're driving across the country tonight. Let's do it. Let's go. So it's this adventure story. And the important thing to know about this, essentially, is that this road trip story is two love stories. It's the love story of Corrina and Teddy beginning to fall in love with each other for the first time, and it's the love story of the grandfather capturing these memories and trying to remember the love of his life, trying to make love, in fact, last forever. So it's these two love stories bound together. And what's interesting about this, in my mind, is this notion of trying to figure out how to go home. And so they're going to Ithaca, New York. And so the entire book is an homage to the Odyssey. Imagine Odysseus, but with Alzheimer's, or a young Telemachus who is trying to help an Alzheimer's-afflicted Odysseus get back home to the Penelope of Ithaca. Unfortunately, it's a Penelope in memory. And so the whole book is this homage to the Odyssey. So it's these love stories, it's an homage to the Odyssey, and then here's the kicker, because this is true as well. The story is also about Corrina. Corrina is, again, a rocker. She wants to get out there and jumpstart this music career. And what's fascinating is that she has this huge musical library. She can play songs from all different eras. She loves a lot of contemporary music, but she was adopted, and part of her relationship with her adopted parents is that she plays the songs of the 60s and 70s that they grew up on. And she calls them the ex-hippies. And she's built this music catalog of songs. So while they're driving, because every road trip needs a good playlist, she's playing some of those songs. And those songs are what jog the grandfather's memory. Because as many of you probably know, music resides in the mind in a very different way than your everyday short-term and long-term memory. Music is more fluid. And in fact, to this day, there's a lot of research that's being done about using music as therapy for people who have Alzheimer's disease to help them tap into their old memories, to help them tap into emotion in the moment, all of that. So Corrina's rock songs, in fact, are the songs that help the grandfather begin to tap into some of these memories. So it's all this in one, and I'm very excited about it because it's so deeply personal to me because it comes from that space of family storytelling. The other thing that I'll share about the book that I think is also just important is that this book is, if you're talking about home and building home, I think that's also a conversation to talk about identity. And something that's really important for me as a writer in all of my books, and as acknowledging the fact that I am a straight white male, I think a lot about identity construction, and I think a lot about, in particular, as I did with the second book that I co-wrote with Jason, All American Boys, I think quite a bit about the construction of whiteness. And I think it's an important subject that often gets left out when we talk about identity, because it is this whiteness that is part of the dilemma when we're talking about racial tension in the United States. So part of Teddy's journey while he's on the road and while he's witnessing some of the racism that Corrina experiences as a transracial, transnational adopted child, is to think, why am I not experiencing this kind of verbal attack in the way that she is, and for him to reflect on that across the country. So this road trip is to go back home. This road trip is to try to think about who we are as people, but also it's Teddy's thinking a little bit about why are we refusing to talk about this part of our national identity. And for me, that's the discussion of white privilege and the harm that it causes across the country. So all those things are wrapped up into one great big adventure, and I had a lot of fun writing this book, creating my own playlists and trying to get inspired with music that really inspires me. So that's the book. And I would love to take some questions if anybody has some questions for me. I know there are some microphones here, and otherwise I'm happy to share with you some more. But I'd love to take questions if you guys have some questions. It's hard for me to see. Yeah, nice one.
My daughter, she's 13. She's downstairs right now, but she is she calls herself a feminist, and I know that the narrative around feminism is also, in addition to racism, something that we just don't seem to want to address or face. Your character is a female. Does that enter into the conversation at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. So I think that's really a valuable question to think about in terms of love as well. And in this book, it's a heterosexual love story. And I think it's really important in the construction of identity to think a little bit about gender and sexuality, and in particular, Corrina as a character who is a very strong female character, but not all feminism has to look a certain way, and I think that's really important. Like when part of my experience teaching was getting to know all these great students and getting to know the different kinds of students. I would teach a whole bunch of different young women who would all consider themselves feminists, but you can't categorize them. They don't look all the same. They argue for it in different ways, right? And I think Corrina is somebody who is strong, but also really grappling with this notion of like, I'm going to take charge of my life. And that's okay. I'm often told that I can't, but it's okay for me to take charge of my life in this way. So for me, it's really important to think about that. But do you have a follow-up?
I was just going to comment that she pointed out to me recently, it's something she saw on the internet, that that a huge percentage of people do not identify as feminist.
Yeah.
But that same people they say, yes, men and women should be equal. So, yeah, part of that conversation is just why does that word engender so much pushback?
Yeah, I agree. It really, it makes me sad because I just can't understand why something as simple as, respect and looking at somebody not through a sexualized lens or not through some kind of preconceived assigned category, but just to look at a person and to say, hey, we're all in this together. It drives me crazy that feminism is a word that seems like a bad word.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh,
Hi.
my voice sounds so weird on the microphone. Is the book mainly about the road trip or the experience in New York?
Wow, nice question. This is like the future literary critic for Kirkus. This is amazing. Nice job. So the book is mainly the road trip because I think when speaking about love, I think it's really important to have a story that is about the process of falling in love, a story about the long twisting, turning, sometimes some things are working out, sometimes things are not working out, road trip, journey story, as opposed to what it might look like at the end. I think too often, in fact, we're given images on TV shows or in magazines that set up an expectation that, like, this is what love should look like. And instead of teaching us the process of living in love, the line that the grandpa says in the book is, to Teddy and Corrina, is the point of living is learning how to love. And it's a valuable lesson to know that love is in action, that love is in process, that love is a journey, love is an adventure, and it's not a place, it's not necessarily a destination. So, genius question. That's really cool. I really appreciate it. What's your name?
Fiona.
Fiona? Fiona, we will be looking for your analysis in years to come. That's so cool. That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there another question?
Will you read to us? Yeah, from the book?
Sure. I'll briefly read. Yeah, no problem. It's funny because I was just out in LA, so I launched the book in New York, launched the book in LA. In New York, I engaged a couple of 17-year-old actors to do some of the scenes and present it that way. And in LA, there was I wasn't behind a podium, so there was a much more interactive experience introducing the book to high schools in LA. So I appreciate the opportunity. I'll read one page because I don't want to go over my limit, and I'll read one page just to try to set the scene to see if it entices you at all. The other cool thing is it's hard for you to see out there, but there's a map at the beginning, and it's wicked cool. And I'm very excited because I think books with maps, lead you into the story, and we were hoping to do that with this. But here it is. All right. And I really wish that the young man who played Teddy in New York were here to read this because he is a fantastic actor, and he is amazing. I can't wait to see what happens with him. All right, here it is, the prologue. Here's the situation. We're lost in the desert, somewhere west of Albuquerque, and the car we've stolen is nose first in the dirt with a flat tire. Jeepa, Corrina, and me. Each day that passes, my grandfather's grip on reality slips further and further away, and if I don't keep a close eye on him, he might wander into the dust and disappear forever. Corrina's walked off in the other direction, so pissed she's not even talking to me, and I'm not sure she wants to go all the way across the country anymore. But I made her a promise I'd get her there. I made Jeepa the same promise, to get him to see that church one last time before his disease wipes it out of his mind and all his memories of Jima are gone. All I want to do is keep these impossible promises I've made, but Mom, Corrina's parents, Jeepa's doctor, the police, and the rest of the freaking known world are all out there looking for us now, and we still have over 2,000 miles to go and only 3 days left to do it. I feel like this is all coming to the end, except I can't, because it can't be. It can't be the end. Not for Jeepa, not for Corrina, and not for me, because it is out here on the road in the middle of nowhere that I have finally come to understand what my grandfather means when he says the point of living is learning how to love. So, thanks. The book begins in media res, in the middle of things, because that's how the Odyssey begins, and we flash back to the night that they're about to leave and how they make the decision, springing the grandfather, Corrina, basically sticking it to the music producer who's, ignoring her, and them busting out of town and heading east. And I think it's important that the book moves from the West Coast to the East Coast because so many road stories are the opposite direction. And for me, this felt like an opportunity to move west to east, as if we were kind of going back in time a little bit, like the grandfather who's kind of digging back into his memories.
Hello. Forgive me for asking what's probably a very basic question as the mother of a 14-year-old.
Yeah.
When I was 14, we didn't have young adult fiction. So why do you think this is a genre that's caught on and in an age of internet and stuff? And why do you write in it?
So I appreciate that question very, very much. I too didn't really technically grow up reading young adult literature, and in truth, I think many young adult writers would say that I don't write for teens, I write about teens. But I would actually say that I write for teens. I want to write for teens and for adults, and I think it's essential that we are creating stories that feel exciting and contemporary, in particular, to help teens see themselves in literature, see their lives, see their pain, see their everyday life in literature, and to not think of literature as that thing that is assigned in class, but rather something that is living and breathing and a part of our everyday life. And when I kind of grew up in the church of literature. My mother worked the night shift at Mass General Hospital, and on Sunday mornings, so that she could go to sleep when she came home, my father would take me out in Harvard Square in Boston and would walk me, and my little hand in his, from bookstore to bookstore to bookstore. And I feel like books were my church, and I'll never forget it. It was such a powerful experience. And I think young adult literature, especially contemporary realism, is trying to capture that spirit of like, hey, you're living literature, you're living the adventure. Here it is, come check it out, and stay excited about literature. I try to do that with Macbeth, but that's an uphill battle, and I feel like I can do it, but I would rather do this. And frankly, I would love it if more classes would pair young adult books with some of the books that we teach in our English courses. For me, I really think that it would be so fun to pair this with the Odyssey. I read the Odyssey in 9th grade in high school, and I taught the Odyssey to various grades when I was a teacher, and it would be cool to have that kind of pairing. So that's what I think. I don't know where I'm even looking right now. I know you're out there, but it's, I really appreciate that question, because I think it's important to think about it as a living, breathing part of our lives, and that's what young adult literature is about for me. So I appreciate that.
Can I ask a completely irrelevant follow-up?
Yeah.
My husband is in mourning over Famous Ray's going out of business. Do you have a backup Greenwich Village pizza suggestion?
I'm sorry, what? He's mourning what?
Famous Ray's closed in Greenwich Village.
Oh, yeah.
And I used to actually order them to Washington for his birthday, so I don't know where to order them from Greenwich Village anymore. Do you have a suggestion?
Yes, I would say McNally Jackson Books. You can order plenty from there, and it's not quite the Village. I know it's Soho, but it's
No, pizza.
oh, pizza. Sorry, that's why I was confused. Pizza, yeah, Two Boots. Come on, Two Boots is great.
Thank you.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I got you. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for doing this talk.
Thank you.
Co-wrote All American Boys with another author, which to me seems a little bit uncommon for a fiction book. Could you talk a little bit about what it was like to collaborate on that versus being the only author?
Sure, I really appreciate your question. And it's interesting because Jason and I have spent a lot of time touring together and speaking together, and I'm very passionate about All American Boys, and I think it's a book that was born really in a moment of rage and love that we had as we were kind of pounding our fists, asking ourselves, what are we going to do? What is our responsibility as young adult authors to help the young adults of our country begin to process the absolute horror that we see on the news week after week after week? Young people of color in general, who are being brutalized by police officers. And it's a disgrace, it's disgusting, and we felt it was necessary to try to do something and say something publicly about this. And for us, it was really important that we could do this together because Jason and I were already friends, and the book really emerges out of our friendship. It doesn't emerge out of an idea. It emerges out of the fact that Jason, who's a black man who grew up in D.C., and Brendan, who's a white man who grew up in Boston, forged this really deep, meaningful friendship. And for us, to share that passion that we have for each other on the page was really, really important. It was also incredibly important for us to lay open and be honest about our cultural experiences that influence the two narrators in the book. So in short, the book is about it's about two boys, one black, one white, who go to the same high school, live in the same town, but as Martin Luther King said in 1968 at Grosse Pointe High School, these are two Americas living side by side. And we wanted to be very, very honest about that. And so for Jason to write out of his cultural experience and for me to write out of mine and to speak very openly and honestly about white privilege and, as I mentioned earlier, the harm that it causes many folks in our country. So we wanted to do it together because it felt like it was the right way to do that, and we had so much trust built between us that when it came to the writing process, we just let each other do what we did, and we wrote the book side by side, checking in with each other like we would if we were walking through DC and going into a bank and having two different experiences, or if we are walking in Boston and going into a restaurant and literally side by side still having two very different experiences because of the inherent racism in our country. So we had to just tackle that together, and it was the best way to do it. And by the way, I'll forever, forever, forever be grateful that I got to work on a project like that with such an unbelievably amazing human being. So thank you for giving me the chance to say that. Hi.
Is there going to be a movie for that?
For the last true love story? Yeah, are you a producer? I mean, that would be great.
Director, but no.
I would love it. I would love it if there were a movie of the last true love story. I have in my mind a kind of cinematic experience because in brief, I also got to write this book by taking the exact road trip that's in the novel. A buddy of mine said, "Hey man, I'll drive, you just write." And so I was in the passenger seat writing as we went by the bluffs in New Mexico, or as we went down into the desert in Arizona, and it felt that kind of cinematic experience through the window. So I would love it if it would happen, and then you could watch it and then read it. Yeah.
Usually I read books before watching it, but
Even better. Nice one. Okay, I'll take one last question and then I think I'm done. So I'll take this last question.
All right, so your book, The Gospel of Winter, was about a young boy dealing with the crisis in the Catholic Church. And so
Yeah.
I was wondering, from your own background and your own growing up, how did that writing and that final book work with your family, with your own personal connections? You know, how did that work in that dynamic?
I deeply, deeply appreciate that you bring up The Gospel of Winter. Thank you so much. It is a very important book in my relationship with my family, which I will answer very quickly. But I will say this, whether it's The Gospel of Winter or All American Boys or The Last True Love Story, I think the fundamentals that are key to me whenever I approach a book is how do I help portray the act of listening? How do I portray this discussion about love? And those are the two things that are key, I think, to the third pillar, which is how do we get a person to stand up when things are going wrong in society, right? I want to help people, and young people in particular, feel like they have a roadmap to learn how to listen, because it's the road to empathy, and that they know what love is in its many forms, and then they can stand up and do something about it. And so for me, writing The Gospel of Winter, which is a story about a 16-year-old boy who's trying to decide whether or not he will let the world know he's been abused by his priest, was a very powerful experience for me to write about, coming from an Irish Catholic background in Boston, going to Catholic school my whole life, having a huge Catholic family, and I was extremely nervous when writing this story. As I tried my best, though, is it's not a book about blaming people. And I don't think any of my books are about blaming people, but instead helping us think about being honest and letting that become a part of our road to love. I will end with this, because the person that made me the most nervous to read the book was my grandmother, who's the matriarch of the family, also the woman who I was with in Ireland when I was touring Ireland, with my grandfather, and to whom this book is dedicated along with my wife. Because she said to me when she read the book, "Brendan, your book, The Gospel of Winter, reminds me of Solomon asking God for a listening heart." And for me, I still have goosebumps just repeating that, because that's my goal, to help us think about how to have a listening heart. And that's my goal in all my books. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Grandma. So I believe I'm done. If you'd like to join me in the signing line, I think it's at 5 o'clock. I think it's lane 20 in section A. Come on down. Love to chat more. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.